Makes Me Wanna Holler by Nathan McCall, Chapter 14, Falling. Liz went into labor July 19th, 1973. I was doing yard work when a call came from her mother. I dropped what I was doing and left for the hospital. It was one of those cloudy experiences where I went through the motions feeling numb inside. When I reached the waiting room, Liz's mother was sitting there alone, reading the newspaper. I said hi and took a seat. She said hi and returned to her reading. In the hours we waited for the delivery, she was cordial, but said no more than was required. A big-boned, gray-haired woman in her 50s, she was wary of me. She viewed me as an irresponsible thug and wondered what Liz saw in me. Determined to bow to no one, I was just as cool toward her as she was towards me. I picked up magazines and flipped nervously through the pages. We sat there quietly, two strangers bound together by a new life. Liz delivered a boy just after midnight. They named him Monroe, after his paternal grandfather. I had little say in the matter since I hadn't donated time and money to help Liz through the pregnancy. I was unemployed, with no prospects of finding a job. Liz's mother's military benefits covered the hospital costs. When the nurses brought Monroe out, he looked like a red, wrinkled, 70-year-old rubber doll. Although I smiled and held him, I felt no real connection to that young life. I didn't feel the joy I thought fathers were supposed to feel. If anything, I felt fear. How was I going to guide a new life when I couldn't even direct my own? What could one child do for another child? After Monroe was taken back to the infants ward, I really felt weird. On TV, whenever somebody had a baby, friends and family passed out cigars and slapped the father heartily on the back and congratulated him. But there was no one there but Liz's mother and me. I felt empty. Liz, who was wheeled back to recovery room, must have felt the same way. She was 18, recently graduated, and stuck with a newborn and with a boyfriend who she might or might not be able to rely on down the stretch. One day, during the summer my son was born, I came home from job hunting and found a letter from the Selective Service notifying me that I needed to register for the draft. Although Junie, Dwight, and half my friends had gone into the military, I knew it wasn't for me. I had hated it ever since Muhammad Ali got screwed over for being a conscientious objector. When he made the statement, "Ain't no Vietnamese ever called me nigger," he captured exactly what I felt. I thought, the nerve of them motherfuckers expecting me to fight for them while they mistreat black folks in this country. I tore the letter up into 1,000 pieces and threw that shit into the trash. To this day, I couldn't tell you my Selective Service classification. I didn't look at it. I didn't care. In fact, I cared so little that I didn't mention the letter to my parents or anybody else. I just threw it away and never heard a peep from Uncle Sam. My life by then was getting very complicated. Shell Shock and I had cut back on our stick-ups after he began dealing drugs full time, but I was still in the life. I had become a father. And shortly after Monroe was born, I got accepted at all three of the colleges I had applied to. I wanted badly to go to Howard University, to break from Portsmouth and try to make a new start, but my parents couldn't afford it. Anyway, it seemed selfish to go away to school and leave Liz to care for the baby alone. I felt there was no choice but to enroll locally at Norfolk State. Norfolk State was, and still is, one of those historically black colleges that would let anybody in. They call it open admissions. That means that if you can write your name and read The Cat in the Hat, you're in like Flynn. So I was in. I signed up to study psychology. In the 1970s, everybody was majoring in the social sciences, especially psychology, sociology, and social work. I had no real interest in psychology. I picked that major because it sounded hip. I bopped into this philosophy class a week late with dark sunshades on, hat on backward, pants hung low, and slumped down into a seat in the back of the room. The professor, a tall, heavy-set dude, the Reverend Elward Ellis, was lecturing. Ignoring me, he kept his eyes on the other students and threw out a zinger without missing a beat. Some of the best philosophers in the world hang on street corners, he said. Boom. He got my attention then. I immediately sat up straight in my seat. I knew he knew something. I knew he had to have something on his cap to make a statement like that. From then on, he was all right with me. I had somebody I could talk to. Reverend Ellis supervised the campus ministry and often invited students to his house for dinner and discussions about spiritual things and life in general. Apparently sensing that I had a lot of heavy stuff going on in my head, he invited me there alone a few times to talk and encouraged me to open up. During one of the visits, he gave me a book entitled As a Man Thinketh. I took the book home and forgot about it. Ellis wasn't the only one to reach out to me that year. There was an English teacher who took a liking to me, and even a man from my neighborhood extended a hand. His name was Hugh Jones. He used to chase the fellas and me all the time when we were young. We cut through his backyard, cussing and carrying on our way to Bimbo's house, and he'd come out, mad as hell, and try to run us down. Mr. Jones had a niece at Norfolk State. I ran into him at candlelight service for incoming freshmen. He acted so shocked and happy to see me on a college campus that I thought he was going to kiss me right there in front of everybody. I didn't know you finished high school, he said. I saw you hanging on the corner so much I figured you had dropped out. Now here you are in college. I want you to know that I'm proud of you and I'll do anything I can to help out. You know where I live. Stop by my house and talk sometimes. He patted me on the back and left. Before then, I thought he was just another tight-butt old head in the neighborhood who didn't want anybody to have any fun. Then I went by his place to chat and saw a different side of him. I saw that he was a deep cat who cared a lot about black people, especially young black people. It made me feel kind of good knowing there were people like Reverend Ellis and Mr. Jones pulling for me. The combination of all those people offering encouragement inspired me to apply myself that first year. I finished as a freshman with a 3.0 grade point average, the first time I had made the honor roll since junior high school. Still, all those folks who tried to help out weren't enough to bring me around. I was too steeped in the life to be easily turned around by a starch-collared cleric and a couple of do-gooders. Besides, my head just wasn't in the right place to take advantage of all they had to offer. There were too many things eating at me. Some of it was just plain immaturity, like ego tripping. In high school, I was the shit, Mr. Popularity. But in college, I was suddenly a small fish in a very big bowl. Everybody at Norfolk State looked so together, especially the cats coming out the military. They went to college on a GI Bill and used their monthly allotment checks to get apartments and to buy nice cars and fine clothes. My cash flow had dried up. I stayed broke all the time. So there I was, in college, an unemployed nobody, dressing in last year's rags, depending on my parents for funds. It didn't take long for me to get discouraged. Beyond that, I didn't feel I fitted in. The college crowd, with their fraternities and sororities, was a different type crowd than I was used to. I couldn't get into those folks. And then there were the administration hassles, from registration with the long lines and runarounds to choosing classes. The whole process seemed like one continuous headache. After that first year, my motivation dropped. I go to some of my classes high, tripping off acid, then get paranoid and get up and walk out in the middle of the lecture. I didn't even bother to go to class half the time. With nobody to tell me what to do and where to go, I wandered aimlessly about campus and spent a lot of time gambling on the pool table and in card games in the student union building. I lost interest in college. Soon, I was back on the streets. In the summer of 1974, Liz came to me and said she had a run-in with Plaz. She and a girlfriend were riding bikes past the 7-Eleven when Plaz, hanging around with some other guys, called her a name. He called me a white girl, so I gave him the middle finger, she said. That was bad news. Plaz and I had a history that went back several years when he and those other cats barged in on Denise Wilson and me and raped her. I never got any get back, but I never forgot it either. I hated Plaz for that. If I thought I had half a chance of kicking his ass, I probably would have moved on him long before the run-in with Liz. But I was in no hurry to lock horns with Plaz. He hung with Scobie D. I was 19 and he was 22 and a much harder cat than me. But he cracked hard on my lady. He disrespected me. Something had to give. One night, shortly after Liz's run-in with Plaz, she and I took Monroe to a carnival near Cavalier Manor. We were walking along, pushing him in the stroller, when Plaz and 3 of his boys walked up and confronted us. His eyes blazing, Plaz got within an inch of Liz's face, shook his finger at her, and said, "The next time you flash your middle finger at me, I'm going to break it off. You hear me?" Then he scowled at me, looked me up and down as if daring me to say something, and turned and walked away. I just stood there thinking, this nigga is going to make me do something I didn't come here to do. Not only had he disrespected me again, but he'd done it in front of my lady. I had to do something. That's when I decided to shoot him. I told Liz, take the baby, put him in the car, and you two go on home. She got scared. Where are you going? I'm going to fuck that nigga up. She pleaded, come on, Nate. We don't have to pay attention to him. I didn't look at her. Go on home. Liz turned and hurriedly pushed the stroller away. As I walked in the direction Plaz and his boys had headed, I stilled my nerves. Whenever I wanted to do something really crazy like that, something I didn't have the natural heart to do, I had to run a head game on myself. I had to shut down my mind. I had to block off all thoughts flowing through my brain to prevent me from talking myself out of it. That's the only way I'd be able to go through with it. That's what I did that night. I decided to shoot Plaz, and I didn't want to change my mind. I couldn't allow that. I had a shoulder pouch that I carried with me. In it were some drugs and a .22 pistol. I spotted Plaz and his boys milling around, talking with some other dudes they'd run into. I walked over to the crowd and said to him, "Yo man, I want to talk to you." Flanked by his boys, Plaz really got loud then. He pointed the finger at me and said, "Nigga, you better get out of my face before I stomp your ass. I'm tired of you and that bitch." While he talked, I kept my hand inside the pouch, gripping the trigger. Sensing that a rumble was about to jump off, people started crowding around. I saw my buddy Greg in the crowd, looking nervously at Plaz's boys, counting heads. I knew he would go down with me if it came to that. Moving close enough for me to smell his breath, Plaz poked a finger in my chest and kept on selling wolf tickets. "I'll kick your ass." In one swift motion, I drew the gun, aimed it point blank at his chest, and fired. Bam! A tiny red speck appeared on the dingy white t-shirt he wore. He fell backward. His arms flew skyward, and he dropped to the ground, landing on his back. As soon as they heard the blast, his boys scattered. Everybody around us ran for cover. I walked towards Plaz, looked into his eyes, and saw something I had never seen in him before. Gone was the fierceness that made him so intimidating all those years. In its place was shock and fear. It was more like terror. In that moment, I felt like God. I felt so good and powerful that I wanted to do it again. I felt like I could pull that trigger and keep on pulling it until I emptied the gun. Years later, I read an article in a psychology magazine that likened the feeling of shooting the gun to ejaculation. That's what it was like for me, shooting off. I stepped closer and raised the gun to shoot Plaz again when Greg came up from behind me and called my name. "No, Nate, you don't want to do that, man." He carefully pulled the gun from my hand. The distraction gave Plaz enough time to collect himself, holding the hand to his bleeding chest. He jumped up from the ground, dashed toward the parking lot, and collapsed between two cars. The carnival grounds, meanwhile, had turned chaotic. People ran screaming everywhere. It was like one of those movies where a monster is trampling through a city and everybody is running, hollering, fleeing for their lives. It made me feel powerful and lightheaded, seeing hundreds of people scattering because of something I'd done. I felt like Scooby D. Only I was confused about what to do next. I didn't know whether to beat my chest and yell at the top of my voice or to shout some pithy John Wayne-esque remark to be quoted when the shooting was recounted on the streets. I yelled to no one in particular, "I hope that motherfucker dies." A security guard had been standing nearby when I first approached Plaz. I half expected him to walk over and arrest me. I waited for a moment for him to come and slap on the handcuffs, but the guard, apparently rattled by all the commotion, also scrambled for cover. Greg asked me, "You got a ride?" I said, "Nah." He said, "Come on." We hopped in his car and drove off. When we got out in the main street, he said, "Where you want to go?" I realized I hadn't thought about that. Where do you go after you shot somebody? And all the stories I heard about Scobe and his boys, it was never clear what they did after they shot or maimed somebody. There was nowhere else to go but home. I said, "Take me to the crib, man." Greg dropped me off and I went into the house. Walking down the hallway to my parents' bedroom, I met my stepfather coming toward me. I said, "I need to talk to you. I just shot somebody." He was calm. "Is he dead?" "I don't know." He thought for a moment, then said, "Let me get dressed. We gotta go to the police station." During the 20-minute ride to the station, neither of us spoke a word. The seriousness of what I had done was dawning on me. Who knows what my stepfather was thinking? After all the run-ins we'd had, he'd known I was headed for something like this. Yet he didn't try to preach to me or say, "I told you so." I actually felt glad to have him on my side. We went downtown and I turned myself in. It felt strange giving myself up voluntarily to the same people I dodged every day. After interviewing me about the shooting, a detective escorted my stepfather and me into a hallway and told us to wait on the bench. Sitting there in the quiet, I felt so alone. There was no roaring crowd or group of running buddies to pat me on the back and sing my praises. It was just me, sitting there, suddenly powerless again, waiting to face the consequences. After an hour or so, the detective returned to the hallway, looked at my stepfather and said, "I'm sorry to keep you waiting out here so long, but Melvin Thompson, the guy your son shot, was rushed to the hospital. They're operating on him. They don't think he's going to make it. If he dies, we're going to have to charge your son with murder." The word hit me like a sledgehammer. Murder? On TV, westerns, when people got shot, they just tied a handkerchief around their arm and went on about their business. Whenever Scobe shot somebody, they lived. Plaz wasn't supposed to die, I thought. Murder? If he dies, then that will mean I killed somebody. Murder? I repeated the word silently to myself, over and over, trying to grasp its full meaning. Then I got a sharp vision of who I really was. I realized I didn't want to be a cold-blooded, badass nigger anymore. I wanted to erase the past few hours, to wipe the slate clean. In desperation, I bowed my head, closed my eyes tight, and prayed to God to spare Plaz's life. Please, God, don't let him die. Please. I prayed so hard that a listener would have thought Plaz was my dearly beloved brother. My stepfather remained quiet. I don't know if he noticed me praying. At that moment, it didn't matter. I was too busy trying to establish a personal relationship with my Lord and Savior. After several hours, the detective returned to the hallway. "I've got good news." Thompson pulled through. The doctor said the bullet barely missed his heart. Another fraction of an inch closer, and he would have been pushing up daisies. I thanked sweet Jesus. Oddly, I was released from my own recognizance. I guess it's an indication of how they felt about the value of black life that I wasn't even required to post bond. When I woke up that afternoon, I checked the newspaper and read a brief story about the shooting. The gravity of what I'd done sank in again, but this time I looked at it in an entirely different light. Now that I was certain Plaz would live, I felt hard again and I thought about the glory. I had toppled an old head. I got dressed, ate, and went outdoors to catch up with some of the fellas. While walking down Roosevelt Boulevard, I saw a car filled with a bunch of old hoods approach slowly. As I cruised closer, heads turned sharply and looked at me. It was some of Plaz's boys. The driver pulled over to the curb and everybody in the car glared. They started talking to each other, debating, I assumed, whether to jump out and do me in. Feigning confidence, I reached slowly into my pocket as though gripping a gun, then stood there and met their gaze. My heart pounded hard. I knew that if they got out that car, they'd stomp me 6 feet under. But no one budged. They talked some more, then the driver pulled slowly away from the curb and drove off. For me, that brief, silent exchange was undeniable proof that I had arrived. I was a bona fide crazy nigga. Everywhere I went after that, guys on the street said, reverently, "Yeah, man, I heard you bust a cap in Plaz's ass." My street rep shot up a full 3 notches. Anybody out there who knew me would think twice about moving against me without a piece. Anybody. My parents got me one of the best criminal lawyers in Portsmouth. By the time I went to court a few months later, he'd worked out a deal with the Commonwealth's attorney for me to plead guilty to a lesser charge of felonious assault rather than face trial for attempted murder. I went before the judge, claimed that I shot in self-defense, and got off light. 30 days in jail for assault, a $300 fine for possession of a firearm, and 1 year's probation. It helped that I was enrolled in college. The judge was so impressed with my college grades that he agreed to allow me to do my jail time on 4 weekends, meaning I had to do only 8 days instead of the full 30. I was thrilled. The first weekend in the Portsmouth jail was the hardest. When I went in and was placed in the cell, the time hit me. 24 hours takes on a whole new dimension behind bars. I struggled through each minute and suffered every creeping hour. By the following weekend, and each week after, I came up with a better way to handle the time. About a half hour before Liz dropped me off at the jail, I'd drop a hit of acid. It usually took an hour or so for it to take effect. By then, I was inside of hell riding high as a kite. I'd trip on the environment for a while, then doze and sleep off the high. Whenever I was awake, I talked through the bars to other guys and watched the black and white TV placed on the stand in the hallway. I left jail on Sunday afternoons, refreshed and ready to face life anew. Sometime after the shooting, I saw Plaz on the streets near the 7-Eleven. I wasn't armed. For a minute, I feared that he might try to get some get back, but he didn't. He didn't even look me in the eye. He didn't want to try me again because he didn't know what I might do. That was the way I wanted it. The shooting calmed Plaz down only temporarily. A few years later, he shot and killed the guy at the Cavalier Manor recreation field. The word on the street was that he did it because Scobe told him so. Plaz went away to prison for a long, long time.